All right, this is citizenship and immigration attorney Parviz Malakouti, and today is August 11th, 2025. This is our 25th mobility space, and today we're talking about São Tomé and Principe's new citizenship by investment program. We want to take a look at it, a sober look, as I say, right? Not marketing and hype based. We want to talk about, all aspects to the extent that we have knowledge about the program, just to get an idea of what we think about it, what people think about it, what people, who people think it's for, who it's attractive for, et cetera, et cetera. As a reminder, this is the 25th mobility space in our series of 50 mobility spaces this year on the hottest topics in dual citizenship and freedom of movement. Our rules are everybody's welcome and anybody can speak. So if you want to speak, just send a request. I will approve it right away. I will invite certain people to speak. I'll ask questions, but you don't have to wait for an invitation. If you got something to say, just cannonball right in and say what you got to say, and we'll go from there. So I thought I'd start off this space with a few fast facts, so to speak, about São Tomé and the program as far as what's being announced so far. And then, of course, I'd like to talk about what the benefits are, potential drawbacks, question marks that are still, surrounding the program. And then we can hopefully get into some interesting and fun conversation about that. So looks like we got a good crowd here so far. We got David Blundell, Alex Ogorji, Patrick, Chris. Welcome, everybody. Sao Tome and Principe is a small island nation. It's off the west coast of Africa. It looks like it's just off of the coast of Gabon. 230 or so thousand as the population. The program, as announced, is a $90,000 flat fee donation. So it's not a recoupable investment. It's a donation. You pay it, and that money's gone. $5,000 application fee. And then the donation is, it seems like $95,000 for applicants from let's call it 2 to 4 applicants applying as once as a family. And then beyond 4 applicants, it seems like it's an additional $5,000 donation per additional applicant. No physical presence requirement. This is being marketed as a zero physical presence requirement, CBI. And no in-person interview. And I believe that the program is touting a 6-week processing timeline, which is going to be extremely attractive for a lot of people that are looking for a second citizenship in a hurry, because it might be integrated with other plans they have, whether it be to relinquish another citizenship or otherwise. As far as visa-free travel is concerned, the number that seems to be bandied about online, different sources, is that citizens of São Tomé and Principe have visa-free access or e-visa access to approximately 61 countries. There's no visa-free access to some of the big markets, UK, Shenzhen, Canada, United States. The São Tomean passport is a 10-year passport for adults. That's one kind of topic I've wanted to talk about more. I haven't spoken about it that much on the mobility space, which is actually the validity period of the passports. 10 years, of course, being much better, generally speaking, than 5 years. And so as far as the citizenship benefits, I mean, taking the framework that I immediately first look to, where does this citizenship give a person the immediate highest right to enter and to have residence in? And then secondly, where does it give the citizen the non-immediate highest right of entry and residence, but some level of right of entrance and residence? So for the first category, of course, immediate highest right of entry is going to be to the country of São Tomé and Principe, right? And then, of course, São Tomé is a member of the CPLP, the Common Portuguese Language Countries, which is kind of like a loose union, basically, of certain countries that give preferred access to citizens of one another as far as residency and otherwise. So those are kind of the very basic outlines, the basic strokes of the program. I've pieced this together through announcements that I've seen online. But one thing I have not been able to find yet is a copy of the act, the enabling legislation, actually, from São Tomé and Principe that actually creates the basis for this program. So I haven't looked that carefully yet, but I did look, especially this morning in advance of this mobility space, and I couldn't find it, through, let's call it, robust Googling. So I haven't gone beyond Googling, but I did a fair amount of Googling, couldn't find the Axe PDF. So if anybody has seen that, feel free to speak up, please let me know, and maybe I'll grab it from you. Otherwise, I'll have to go and look for that later, because we always want to obviously look to primary source legal materials for describing benefits, drawbacks, and general characterization, or excuse me, characteristics of any program. So that's it as far as the intro is concerned. Number of questions that I think are interesting that I'd like to discuss. First of all, who is this program most attractive to? Okay. Secondly, what do we think, or what do people think? I don't want to say we, because we might not all agree, right? That's totally fine. But what do people think about the value of this citizenship, specifically the robustness of it? Okay. How resistant is it going to be to the winds that are currently blowing against citizenship by investment? And yeah, generally, what do we think about the value of the program, specifically for the price? This is, I believe it's the cheapest CBI on the market right now, with a flat fee donation of 90,000 plus a $5,000 flat fee, application fee. So these are questions I'm certainly interested in exploring and discussing. We got Patrick back. He's been absent for a couple. Welcome back, Patrick. Patrick, I'll throw out the first question to you, and of course, anybody else can also chime in as they like. Uh, General question, Patrick. What do you think overall about the value proposition of this new program, based off of the limited info that we have so far about it? And by limited info, I'm alluding to the fact that it doesn't seem like there's much primary source legal material yet out on it. What do you think about the general value prop, Patrick?
Yeah, we're glad to be here. I think that's a fantastic first question. I think generally, as a value proposition, it's interesting that they selected the $90,000 price range. It seems that they wanted to be the low cost leader, but also wanted to still be not that far from the current market. And so they came in with the $299 price when everyone else is $3. Um, which is interesting. I feel like they did their market research there, but as a value, I mean, I don't see that Sao Tome and Principe as a destination for as highest right of entry into the country. I don't see it as a huge destination for lifestyle or tourism per se. I, but that being said, I think there might be a play for people who do business in Western Africa. I think that there's some potential there for the market. I've also seen the idea floated around. I have not substantiated this, so I'm just listing it here as colorful dialogue to enhance the conversation. But I have heard it that since it is a member of the Lusophone countries, that it has the potential to grant you faster naturalization rights to a country like Portugal. Whether or not that is true legally or true practically is, of course, untested. But if that were true, so that's a big conditional if, then I could see a world where that might be a valuable, priced as a fast pass to an EU citizenship. That strikes me, if that is true, that strikes me as pretty interesting, because you're essentially taking a small island nation that doesn't necessarily derive its value from something like Schengen access or access to North America, but has a pretty unique cultural stacking benefit, satellite benefit that is not foolproof, but potentially a little more robust than, say, visa-free access. And so, I think that there's the value there, but again, I think this is going to be a pretty niche market. Um, but that's okay, because with 230,000 citizens existing, they're not looking for broad mass appeal. So I think the value justification is there, but I don't think it's a large market.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking, a lot of the value of this citizenship by investment, right, is going to depend on how comprehensive and how robust the springboard benefit to other Lusophone countries is, right? If we find out that in theory and in practice, South Tomean citizenship really gives strong, easy, fast path to residence in the other Lusophone countries, the members of the CPLP, then yeah, that I would think that that has a material effect on the value of the citizenship. Let me throw out a question to Alex Ogorgi, if Alex can speak. If you can't speak, no problem, of course, but I'll just throw this out to you. Alex, what do you think about the value of South Tomean citizenship? Just as let's call it just the second citizenship. So without respect to any springboard benefits, just the ability to be citizen in a country, to have them issue you a valid passport that you can then use to apply for residencies and visas elsewhere. So basically, as a way, South Tomean citizenship as a way to get away from single sovereign passport dependence. Do you rank that as having value? If so, how much?
Yeah, I think there's some value there. Probably most people can get some kind of citizenship by descent these days, but for those that can't, Sao Tome could be an interesting opportunity, especially those with a family or planning to have a family soon. The Lusophone benefits could be useful if, for example, your kid, if they get the passport, which seems to be the case, through descent, if the parent buys it through investment, they would have, for example, a 1 year timeline to Brazil. And in the interim, you'd have a second passport, which could be useful, as you said, for identity verification reasons, for the better exit rights of your country, or just as an insurance policy to reduce sovereign risk. So comparing to the other options, I think in that price point, you have basically Pakistan and Vanuatu are probably the closest ones, and Nauru as well. And the potential Lusophone benefits are interesting and might give an edge to Sao Tome over Vanuatu. Pakistan is the cheapest, but there's some issues there. You could also argue that the E2, Pakistan being an E2 member, could make it more competitive. And if your kid were to be born via descent, then they could access the E2 benefits right away. So uh, I think that it's a good place to start the pricing, and they can always decrease it later on if they don't see much uptake.
Yeah, I found the pricing to be really interesting as well too. As Patrick said, I mean, they Sound to me came in at cheapest, but not that far off, right? So not too far off from the next closest one. It also occurred to me, I also kind of did think about old school marketing 101, like something being priced at 99.99, or $9.99, right? Because donations 90,000, presumably all in with the application, you should be kind of just under that 100K mark. So I don't know if that was just by, by coincidence, but I did kind of think about that aspect, the fact that it's coming in right under 100,000. For others who are listening, what Alex is referring to with Pakistan is the citizenship by investment program, which exists at least in theory, whereby citizens of Commonwealth countries can become a Pakistani citizen by making a bank transfer of, I believe it's 5 million. I forget what the Pakistani currency is, but 5 million of their currency, which I think approximately, depending on the conversion at rate at the time, is about 18 to 20,000 US dollars. I've read about the program. I've inquired about the program, even with Pakistani lawyers. I don't know a single person who's ever gotten that citizenship by investment. I don't say that means that nobody has gotten it, but I've asked around. I've never met somebody who has gotten that, or even a lawyer, spoken to a lawyer who says that they've actually helped somebody get that. Alex, I agree with most of your points. I don't think a majority of people qualify for some second citizenship by descent. I think that might be a little bit overstating it. And I understand we don't have really, strong statistics on this. So, people were speculating. I think a lot of Americans do. I would estimate maybe between 20 and 30, 20 to, 20 to 30, 20 to, 35% of Americans might have some eligibility for citizenship by descent. But your point is well taken. For those who don't qualify for citizenship by descent and they want another citizenship, right? this might be, of course, an option. Another thing that came to my mind is somebody who needs to get a second citizenship in a hurry. If São Tomé authorities stick to that 6-week, if they actually come through on that 6-week processing timeline, if it's reliable, that's of great value, right? Especially if somebody's trying to get a second citizenship in a hurry in order to relinquish the first citizenship, or for some other reason. Okay, maybe they're trying to do a an end around some sort of travel ban against against their citizens. So, for example, the example I brought up, I think in our last mobility space, is Trump's June 4th presidential proclamation. Okay, Muslim ban 2.0, which includes basically visa bans against people who are citizens of Iran and a few other countries. If you're an Iranian citizen, hypothetically, and you're a citizen of another country, let's call it São Tomé and Principe, okay, and you apply for the U.S. visa on the other country's citizenship and passport, so in this case, the São Tomean citizenship, you sidestep that ban against Iranian nationals per the June 4th presidential proclamation. So in that sense, that nationality toggling is really, really important. And if you need to nationality toggle in order to access a country, in this case it's the United States, but let's say it's another country that has some sort of travel ban against nationals from your country. If you need to nationality toggle, and that's your main reason for needing it, this is the cheapest path for citizenship by investment, and it might also be the fastest as well. The Vanuatu CIU is known to be pretty darn fast. But even I would venture to guess even the majority of Vanuatu citizenship by investment applications still take longer than 6 weeks of processing at this time. So there's some potential interesting use cases here. Now, one thing, I thought another question. We got David here. David, can you speak, David, or are you just in listening mode right now?
Yeah, I can speak.
Okay, you can speak. Okay, so David, you haven't been shy about mentioning in previous spaces that you're American. So if you're an American citizen, okay, and if a person, if an American is relinquishment curious, let's call it, okay, relinquishment curious, they don't know what their path is long term. They don't know where they exactly want to live their life long term, but they know that they want to not necessarily relinquish, but they want to have the ability to relinquish quickly if necessary, and therefore have a second citizenship and a passport. Do you think that this is the São Tomean citizenship for $95K all in might be something that profile would be looking at?
I suppose so. I think I've read that São Tomé and Principe only allow for naturalized citizens to have to keep the São Tomé nationality. So I think in order to naturalize under this scheme, you probably have to renounce any other citizenships that you have.
Oh, interesting. Is that what you read? I'm gonna have to look
that's
that
what
up.
I've read, and so that makes this kind of a pretty significant detail.
So you're saying you read that if you naturalize into São Tomé and Principe, you have to relinquish the other citizenships that you have?
Yes, just reading on the Wikipedia article about São Tomé and nationality law. Mm-hmm. It looked like they allowed dual nationality for nationals from birth since 2003, but otherwise they disallow plural nationality.
See, this is why I'm really itching to read the primary source legal text of the act, because I would guess there's no way this program survives at all if naturalizing into it, if getting the citizenship means relinquishing the others. So I would have to guess that if current, or let's call it pre-CBI São Tomé nationality law required that, I would have to guess that there's a carve out or an exception for CBI applicants. Has anybody on this space been able to find the text of the actual act for the CBI?
Yes, I did.
You did?
Yes. I shared it in a comment under the space, so you may be able to access it there. It hasn't been officially published by a government source, from what I understand, but this is kind of a pre-publishing copy for journalists. It's shared in a Google Drive is where I found it.
Okay, and this is a comment under the space.
Yeah,
perfect. I see it right now. Okay,
and great. It's in Portuguese, so if you're
No,
If
my
you're
my Portuguese is
then
not up to snuff. Meaning, by that I mean mostly I cannot read Portuguese. Okay, got it. So I'll have to take a look at that later. We won't waste time on that right now, unless somebody else has, unless somebody's already read the act and is primary source and can comment on it. We got Patience here as well as Esther. Welcome, guys. Right. Does anybody think this program survives if it requires, or if anywhere it's written in South Tomé law, or it's unclear whether the person has an obligation to relinquish their previous citizenship? Does anybody think this program gets any takers?
for those for whom this citizenship would be an upgrade, it may get some takers. But otherwise, I don't see this as a very attractive program.
Right. Yeah, maybe for those who come, I would say I would think, David, not only would South Tomé citizenship have to be an upgrade for them, but they'd also have to be coming from another citizenship that strictly prohibits multiple citizenship. Because if, let's say, the person's coming from a citizenship that does allow multiple citizenship, but South Tomé citizenship is still an upgrade, well, for those people, they could go to another CBI, they could go to Vanuatu or another one that, and potentially upgrade and still keep their other citizenship, right? So unless there's a unique value proposition of the South Tomé citizenship, meaning, for example, let's say this person's looking to springboard into CPLP countries, and they're convinced that the South Tomé citizenship does provide a strong springboard, accepting that, I don't think even just an upgrade would be enough, assuming the person comes from a weaker citizenship. Patience is in the house. I'm inviting you, Patience, to speak. Feel free to chime in if you like. I'll just take a moment to talk about springboard access to the United States. So, in case anybody's thinking, and well, first of all, we in the United States believe that the U.S. is the center of the world. So, of course, any discussion of a CBI or any other citizenship program, we have to mention what it means for access to the United States, to the number one. I'm speaking tongue in cheek before anybody gets too worked up. Okay, so first of all, like I said before, South Tomé citizens don't have visa-free access to the United States. South Tomé is not a member of the United States E1 or E2 treaty visas. The South Tomean, so a South Tomean who applies for a B2 tourist visa. B2 tourist visa is kind of the typical visa that people want to get a tourist visa in the United States apply for. They basically can apply for a single entry visa for a stay period of 3 months, and that's a worse term than what a lot of citizens are used to. So a common term for citizens applying for a B2 tourist visa in the United States, if they're granted the visa, is a 10-year multiple entry B2 tourist visa that allows for stays of up to 6 months. So South Tomean citizens do not get very good B2 tourist visa terms to the United States, for lack of a better term. I also checked ahead of this mobility space for the visa overstay rates of South Tomean citizens in the United States. And the country is so small that for 2023, there was not a single South Tomean visa overstay in the United States. And for 2022, I believe there was one overstay, and I think that was 10% of the South Tomeans who had visited the United States. The reason I checked that is because that is the criteria, the explicitly mentioned criteria. So the visa overstay rates is the explicitly mentioned criteria for this new U.S. visa bond program, whereby the United States is saying basically people who are citizens of certain countries that have high visa overstay rates in the United States, now they're going to have to put forth a $15,000 bond in order to apply for a tourist visa to visit the United States. And this was big news about a week ago. So I obviously wanted to look at that, the visa overstay rate, just to see how likely South Tomé is to be targeted by this visa bond pilot program. And I think it's not that likely to be targeted because of how few South Tomeans visit the United States. So that's what we're looking at as far as springboarding to springboard opportunity in the United States. I don't know much about the rights, the reciprocal rights of citizens of CPLP countries. I wish I did. It's just not that much a part of my work or my research. I think a big part of the value of the citizenship is going to come from, what we think are going to be those benefits, those CPLP benefits. Does anybody want to come up who has some knowledge on the CPLP reciprocal preferred access benefits? Does anybody have anything to say on that point?
If not, I'd like to jump back in and correct what Wikipedia misinformed me of.
Go ahead.
So according to the Wikipedia article on São Tomé and nationality law, only nationals from birth are allowed to have dual nationality from São Tomé and Principe, but the actual law in place at this time, since 2022, allows for naturalized applicants to have no more than 2 foreign nationalities at the time of application. So that means that after naturalizing, you can have a cap of 3. I suppose it might be possible even after that to acquire additional nationalities, but you need to have no more than 2 at the time of application.
Okay, sorry, can you just repeat one more time, David? What was the source that you read that stated you can naturalize into South Tomé citizenship with 2 other citizenships?
Yeah, so that's from law number 7 of 2022. I believe that's Decreto Law number 7.
Got it. Did you read from that law or just a reference to the law?
Read from the law.
Read from the law. Okay, so
translated for what it's worth.
Got it. Okay, got it. And I appreciate it. And this is, there's a good reminder of a lesson in here, right? Which is the only thing that's law is primary source law. So descriptions of law, summaries of law, none of that is law. The only thing that's law is primary source law. So by primary source law, we're talking about statutes, constitutions, cases, regulations. And as we see, it's like a game of telephone, right? We all remember the game of telephone. As soon as people start referencing and annotating and summarizing and repeating the law, immediately it starts derogating from accuracy, from what it is. And then, obviously some of those derogations can be really important and wrong. And sometimes, we see this all the time. That's why we got to be really strict, even sticklers, I would say, about whenever possible referencing primary sources, primary legal sources. Okay, good. So yeah, I mean that I don't, I can't say for sure that David, what you said is true, but that sounds like something that would be more palatable, right, for people naturalizing into Sao Tomean citizenship, right, other than being forced to relinquish their previous citizenships. I just can't imagine that a CBI program would come up with a program and still allow that to be in law. Never mind. Excuse me. Okay, Patrick, you have something to say?
Yeah, 2 little quick anecdotes. One is, what's interesting is that as a program that is specifically marketed with this like unique, what I personally believe is probably a pretty well researched market price, is also one that has a law that at the time of application can only have 2 other citizenships. So essentially, it's kind of this like Goldilocks where it's like, we are okay with, you have to have at least 1 other citizenship, presumably, can't be stateless, or, well, they don't say that explicitly, but it's implied. But on the top end, you can't be someone who's just like going around collecting citizenships, which is unique because you'd think that something priced like this with kind of unique, stacking benefits, springboard benefits, you would think that they would want to target people who are like, hey, maybe I can get a 3rd or 4th citizenship, especially if it's on the way to, another Lusophone country. So that's my little thought process that's slightly critical of what appears to be the existing law. And then the second thing I was going to add is, um, beyond primary resources, um, there's also the actual, like, in practice word on the street. And I know that that's a lot more difficult to verify, but um, I always go back to I go back to the Pakistan example, or the example I also like is Panama, where the existing law is in place and you can read about it, but whether or not it's actually enacted and there are practical steps that you can do to take it, to participate in the program may not actually be there, right? The municipal governor might not ever show up to his office, so there's like a practical barrier to getting access to a program, and that's something you know, seems unlikely with the CBI, but um, but it's also something that's an extra layer on top of the primary resources.
Yeah, great point. What's happening in practice on the ground absolutely matters because where a right exists legislatively, the regulatory bodies that are tasked with executing those laws can strangle the path. They can make it so that it's just either extremely difficult or impossible to actually go through the steps to get the program. So yeah, that's absolutely right. That's important. And that point, Patrick, is why I've been kind of skeptical about the existence of the Pakistani CBI because in practice, I can't find people or lawyers who actually have taken, even Pakistani lawyers who have taken people through this. Again, not saying they don't exist, but if they do exist, I don't think there's that many. So practice, real life, what's happening on the ground in the arena absolutely matters. Couple interesting points. South Tomean citizens have e-visa access to Iran, to Cuba, right? Couple interesting places, right? So for somebody who's let's call it an adventure traveler, so maybe somebody who was born in the West who's an adventure traveler, right? They're interested in picking up an oddball citizenship or a non-aligned citizenship and passport. Those little visa-free accesses might actually matter to them.
Yeah, I also bring up another thing, and that is I'm curious as to how the program will be received globally. And I think back to other CBIs that no longer exist. And sometimes they don't exist because they were poorly marketed or poorly priced. That seems unlikely with this price point. But I think of the CBI program of Comoros, which closed a few years back. And I know Patience and I have tweeted about this in the past about the price point on it. I believe was 45 or 40 or $45,000. Granted, this was several years ago before all the crazy inflation of the last 5 years, but that program was shut down because it essentially, from my understanding, was there was elements that the government couldn't control, and people were, there was levels of corruption and abuse in the program. And so I do wonder where, you know, it's always good to look at not just the program and how it's managed, but sometimes it's outsourced. Henley and Partners is always sitting there trying to be the person who designs the program. Is it outsourced or is it taken in house? And if it is, you know, to what level is there this institutionality of the government, and will that degrade over time? Because if it does, then so will the program. Um, and whether or not it survives, indicates probably the strength of that citizenship, or potentially a degradation of the rights thereof in the future.
Yeah, so for the Sao Tome program, apparently there's a CIU that's been set up specifically to take applications. They're announcing that the CIU is going to be headquartered in Dubai, and it looks like there's a new startup advisory, STP service advisory, working with the Sao Tome and Principe authorities. So. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know who these people are. I don't know. We're obviously the people that are working with the new CIU or in the new CIU come from. So that's a question mark, of course, for me. Obviously, one would hope that it's not just above board, but set up in such a way to not be the ire and target of the EU Commission and other countries. But the program being as new as it is, and with as little primary source info that's available as is available, I think that's a question mark. And where there's question marks, at least for me, being a lawyer and taking the path of caution, then means there's degraded confidence, in my opinion, with currently, basically, to try to go through and do the program. So doesn't mean, and I just want to clarify, that doesn't mean that I don't think people should do the program. I don't think that necessarily the program is a scam or anything like that. I'm just saying basically that to me the value prop for the particular person who's considering it has to be higher, a little bit higher, because of, to make up, let's say, for what I think is kind of the lack of the track record and lack of information, primary source information that's available in the program, at least to date.
So I've been doing a little more digging into São Tomé and Principe's naturalization law. The actual text of the law translated into English says that São Tomé nationality is prohibited for those who hold more than 2 foreign nationalities. And then it goes on to say that any naturalized citizen who acquires a 4th nationality immediately loses their São Tomé nationality.
What's the title? What's the title and year of that statute? Or is that the Constitution?
That's from the nationality law from March of 2022. So it's called law number 07/2022. It's the current nationality law. Yep.
Got it. Yeah. If the text of that law is left undisturbed, unrevised by the new law that's created the CBI, then that's a drawback, obviously. But we have to see the text of the new CBI law, or read it carefully and see if there's carve outs, if there's exceptions, or if the new law totally did away with those restrictions on the numbers of citizenships.
I'm parsing through it right now, and I'm not seeing any modifications to those limitations, but I'm still looking.
Got it. Appreciate it. So what do people think about that then? I mean, you have 2 citizenships. You go into São Tomé citizenship, naturalized there, and whether it's enforced or not, whether São Tomé has the ability and the appetite to enforce a prohibition on you getting additional citizenships. If the letter of the law says you can't, so then you're stuck. São Tomé is the last country that you can, naturalize in above board and be open to all your countries about all your citizenships. What do we think about that? What do you guys think about that restriction? Is it not that big of a deal if you already have that many citizenships, or is that a deal breaker?
I am tending to find myself in agreement with John Richardson that more citizenships is not always better, but having a handful of really useful ones is probably the best situation to be in. And yeah, I don't know if this São Tomé citizenship is especially great unless you're planning to use it for probably Central or West African inroads, or possibly as a springboard to CPLP benefits.
Hi everyone. So I'm actually fluent in Portuguese, and I'm reading this here, that someone who gets a 4th citizenship automatically does lose the São Toméan nationality, and that somebody who has 3 nationalities already cannot get it, at least in the current nationality law, which I can't find any necessarily any changes or any new law about citizenship by investment there. So the restrictions would likely apply, I would think, or at least they would in theory. I don't know about in practice, but that is something to consider.
Well, that seems a huge problem in the world of multinational families, because you could easily have that by descent, or your kids could have that by descent as well. You might even have it and you not know it, right? A lot of people might have some Polish, Italian, other ancestry from Europe that goes many generations back. And so I think that really reduces the attractiveness of the citizenship program.
Well, on the other hand, they don't limit it for born citizens. It's only for naturalized citizens that the limitation applies. So after the first generation, then this presumably doesn't have all that much impact for descendants.
But if you can't qualify, if you have too many citizenships, it's quite possible that someone has 3 citizenships and they don't know.
Of course.
And thus they thought, the law will say that if you didn't qualify, then they can revoke your nationality, or that you never had it, probably, in which case your kids were never born with it now. Obviously, there's enforcement and all of that, but it seems very suboptimal to have these restrictions that you don't need. And like talked about in other spaces, countries can also just give you citizenships if they wanted to. What if Liberland gives you a citizenship? Does that count? Are you now wiped out? If Liberland just decides we're going to give every person in the world Liberland citizenship, does that mean that you've lost your São Tomé citizenship?
It says someone who naturalizes as a São Tomean citizen loses São Tomean nationality immediately upon coming to acquire a 4th citizenship. So if the Lebanese government said everyone in the world is now Lebanese, you would probably come to acquire that citizenship even if you don't necessarily have any idea of it or desire for it necessarily.
Yeah, this is a problem of countries' domestic laws that incorporate other countries' laws regarding naturalization and acquisition of citizenship. The problem is people can acquire citizenships through unilateral agency, meaning they didn't want to necessarily acquire it. It was imposed on them, right, by domestic law. And so, the more countries that you have citizenships in, or some association in with, that have laws that reference and incorporate domestic laws of foreign countries regarding citizenship, the more you get this lattice work of kind of cross-referencing, domestic laws that can obviously, result in something to your detriment. So, like Alex said, some of these micronations, right? Like, who knows? Maybe they say everybody in the world is a Liberland citizen. This is our marketing. This is how we're going to get attention. This is how we're going to, pull people in, right? Do I think that other countries will necessarily recognize, all other countries will necessarily recognize Liberland's, imposition of citizenship on everybody in the world? I don't know. Probably not necessarily, but it's an unnecessary complication and a difficulty. And all it takes basically is for it to be a problem for a person. Really, all it takes is one country to at least, want to investigate that or look into that, or to require from the applicant, okay, well, we want a declaration from you that says XYZ, you don't consider yourselves, or whatever it is. It's more friction. It's more friction. So I definitely think that if the São Tomean current nationality law still has that restriction on nationality, number of nationality for people naturalizing, I definitely think that's suboptimal. Even if you don't want at any one time to have more than 3 or 4 citizenships, you want to have the maximum flexibility to be able to move in and out of those citizenships. You be the one who decides, not be the country that's unilaterally revoking or even imposing. You also don't want, situations like the Liberland example, where countries try to unilaterally impose their citizenship on you. And that's probably most clearly illustrated nowadays in the case of accidental Americans. I don't know if it's just because of, the circles that I run in, as, professionally, where, accidental Americans and American CBT is a huge topic, but it seems to me like that's kind of one of the big famous examples, right, of people who have American citizenship imposed on them involuntarily due to domestic law of a country. And that's, of course, people who are born abroad, born outside the United States, to one or more American citizens and are considered to be American by the U.S. government, with all the obligations attendant to.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one little brief thing, and that is, there's part of me that thinks that this is very intentional because of the country's Lusophone position in the world, and I guess I'm stuck on this point a little bit, but if they think that that springboard benefit is valuable enough to price their citizenship at this price point, then uh, then they would say, hey, get our citizenship. But then if you get Brazilian citizenship or Angolan citizenship, I don't know if that pathway exists. I'm just tossing out Lusophone countries or Portugal, then you don't need us anymore, right? Uh, there's a part of me that seems like that's kind of an engineered solution, um, where they don't want the political baggage of giving out the citizenship to people who use it for its springboard benefits. But if you but the value comes from the springboard benefits. So if you use it for that, then you don't need us anymore, and so you don't no longer have the citizenship. I would say that that all makes sense, except for the fact that this law is now 3 years old if it was passed in 2022. So uh, an interesting coincidence. I'll leave it at that. But it does seem to me that there might be some intentionality there.
Yeah, Patrick, I would think that it's more likely that there is intentionality there, meaning specifically the intention you mentioned was there if part of the value that Sao Tome and Principe considers, the CBI to be to them, not just the money, but the fact of getting additional citizens. I presume most countries who start a CBI program, the first consideration is revenue generation. I presume that usually by default. Some countries may also say, "Hey, we have a population issue. Okay, we want more population." If the second is and was a bigger consideration for, not a bigger consideration, but let's say at least a material, substantial consideration for Sao Tome and Principe, then I'm more inclined to believe that intentionality was there that you mentioned.
Has anyone looked at the voting rights for the CBI citizens?
Nope, not yet.
Because that would be interesting. And I think that's maybe related to the concerns on multiple citizenships the country has because it's so small. So imagine if a bunch of people were to start buying the citizenship program, it's not inconceivable that they could have 5% of their population living outside the country without many strong ties to the country and also able to vote. So perhaps there's a relation there. I don't know.
So it says that in 2022, the Deutsche Welle says that Sao Tomean citizens in 2022 voted for the first time in Portugal. Sao Tomeans who live in Portugal voted for the first time for members of their national assembly. So that could have something to do with the dual nationality prohibition, or not prohibition, but the limit on having a number of nationalities.
Yeah, it's my experience in small countries that the political economy of contributes as a citizen and who is a guest in the country is fairly pronounced. And so even if you are a citizen of Sao Tome and Principe and you're in what is a relatively small country, like they might put up some hurdles for someone who's a new citizen, or not necessarily a new citizen, but like a second or third citizen, where they don't want that kind of divided interest, especially if your country sends people abroad for work a lot and then they come back. And so there's different like tools to do that. It's like, do you have multiple citizenships? Well, then you can't vote. Or the typical tool for that is you have to live here or be registered locally to be able to vote. And so, we handle it a little bit differently in the US, but every country handles like the rights of their expats to vote from abroad differently. Um, I don't know, maybe that's I don't necessarily think the right to vote is like super incredibly valuable for a lot of citizenships in this world, but call me a cynic, but that voting is more pronounced when the country's uniquely small, like Sao Tome and Principe. So I do think there's a potential conversation around there about the benefits or the value of your right to vote in a country.
Yeah, great point. Obviously, the right to vote is more pronounced, has a bigger impact the smaller the country is. Let me ask a question. I'd like to go one by one through everybody who's willing to speak. Generally speaking, obviously this is highly country specific, but generally speaking, if you think about getting the value of getting a second or third citizenship, where do you rate the right to vote among the value of the benefits? So, one, is it the most important thing to you? Is it the sixth most important thing? Is it the seventh most important thing? Let me throw it back to you, Patrick. Where do you let's not just say vote. Let's say, where do you value voting and the greater concept of civic participation, civic political participation among the benefits of getting a second or third citizenship?
Ooh, I have a good answer for you. Already teed up. It comes down to your rights, or it comes down to your benefits and your obligations of the citizenship. How do you best protect that? In the United States, we have citizenship-based taxation. If you live abroad, you are in the minority of American citizens, and therefore your ability to vote to change your taxation policy is pretty limited. Everyone writes off American expats abroad because they have no real electoral voting power. Also, they're voting from where they're registered in the United States, so they're lumped in at the local level. They're not really a great cohesive voting group, unfortunately. That's not always the case in other countries. But, for example, Italy's a good example. Italy has 4 representatives for Italian citizens who live abroad. So there are 4 people who are uniquely appointed to manage the rights of those abroad. They're not lumped in with people voting locally. And many have critiqued that as both a benefit and a non-benefit, because those 4 people network with the rest of the legislator to ensure the rights of citizens abroad, and they protected citizenship by descent for many years. There's a reason why Italy changed their law with an emergency decree. It would have never happened through the regular legislative process, in part because of that organization of how elected officials are organized. And so, to sum up, my very long, wordy answer is, how well organized is the government where you as a voter can protect your right to not be taxed and your right to not be stripped of citizenship or have the citizenship program changed on a medium to long-term horizon? If both of those if the political incentives are aligned in both of those places, then your right to vote is pretty valuable, and even augmented more if it's a small country. But if not, then I would say the right to vote is of limited value.
So is it fair to summarize your position as the more that your other benefits of citizenship are dependent on your ability to maintain them through the right to vote, the more important the right to vote is?
Bingo. Yes.
Okay. No, that's an interesting take. What do you think, Alex? Same question.
I think I would agree with Patrick and then add that mimetically it's quite valuable if you have the right to vote, because it makes it harder to single you out as a not real citizen. But if you can say, no, I'm a real citizen, I can vote in every election and have all the same rights and responsibilities as someone else, then it's a stronger case. Likewise, if you can vote, you can also reach out to the legislatures and government officials, because conceivably you're a voter. And so they respect your opinion more than just some random guy that happens to have their passport. So I think mimetically, it's quite useful both domestically for getting what you want, to say that you're a voter, and also internationally to legitimize you as a real citizen. And so I think it's useful for those things. But in terms of using it, I don't think most people will use their actual voting right.
Yeah, great point about not giving a basis, not emanating a basis by which people can discriminate against your type of citizenship or claim that you're not a real citizen, or it's that you're anything less than. Patience, what about you? Same question. How important is the right to vote generally speaking, when you're thinking about acquiring a second or third or fourth citizenship?
I'm not sure you guys can hear me. Hey. Yeah, I think I can kind of follow on what Patrick said earlier. France is the same. We literally have people in the assembly depending on which part of the world you live in. So there are people from North America, like people in Canada and the US vote for one representative and so on and so on. So it has value because there's folks that you can bother when there's chats about citizenship-based taxation, chats about raising taxes on non-residents, things like that. So it has been helpful, and it has been also used by political parties locally because expatriates tend to vote a certain way. That's how Macron got elected in 2017. He went and he raised money in New York for that. So there are benefits for the expatriates in shielding ourselves with all the shenanigans that are happening in the country. But I'm also a citizen of another country which does not allow non-resident citizens to vote. So I don't have a strong opinion. They are good. Like I couldn't care less about what's going on the ground. So there's that as well on that other citizenship. But I think what was said earlier with the volume of applicants, the volume of people holding the citizenship overseas versus just residing domestically is a big factor. Some countries have a really large diaspora and rely on things like remittances or things like that. So they have to kind of cater to that diaspora. Some others don't care. Like you said, the Americans couldn't care less because diaspora is relatively small. I think you have to be careful with the potential of countries to enforce the laws that they would be passing domestically. But those tiny CBI countries, I think it's a non-starter of an issue. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, David L'Esperance is a great consultant, thinker, writer, researcher in the space of mobility. He often, I don't want to butcher it, but I think the line he says is democracy is 9 wolves and a chicken voting on who's for dinner, right? I guess if you're going to at least be in that mix, even if you're the chicken, you want to at least have the ability or at least the threat to be able to cast the vote. Let me go to David and Jay. What do you think about that ability to vote? And Patience brought up, he kind of highlighted an important distinction, right? Which is not just the ability of the naturalized citizen to vote, but also to vote being a non-resident. So the question is, again, for Jay and David, for both of you, one after the other, how importantly do you rate that right to vote among the rights and benefits of picking up a second, third, fourth citizenship?
In general, I think that it's not especially important in a country where you have, to quote South Park, a giant douche versus a turd sandwich, running for a particular office. In other words, 2 bad options, which is what we often have in the United States. However, in a smaller jurisdiction, such as São Tomé and Principe, where there's a population of less than 250,000 people, that right to vote becomes, a lot more important because it's kind of the size of a small city where I'm from. Where does it rank then? I think in this particular case, it ranks kind of high. And my analysis of the nationality law and these new regulations for the citizenship by investment program informs me that the naturalization does grant voting rights, and even under the citizenship by investment program, it also grants voting rights to the naturalized citizen. And the naturalized citizen also doesn't have to do any mandatory military service, which would otherwise be the case. So that would be kind of the other side of the coin about voting rights versus obligations to the country. In many countries, you do have some kind of obligations to the country, but in this particular case, because the CBI program is open to even those who've had no residency in São Tomé, there aren't any real obligations other than paying the fees. So it's some additional rights for a price with very little in the way of obligations, but equal rights with natural-born citizens. So interesting.
Right. Well, São Tomé can only have a say on whether its citizens have equal rights vis-a-vis what they have the authority, to grant. Right. A São Tomé cannot say, they cannot effectively say whether a São Tomean citizenship by birth versus by investment gets equal rights as a São Tomean citizenship getting visa-free access to Iran or to Cuba, right? Because those third countries obviously can and sometimes do choose to discriminate on the basis of whatever, and we're increasingly seeing discrimination on the basis of the means of getting the citizenship, meaning people who got the citizenship by investment are discriminated against. But yes, otherwise, I totally agree with you, David. As far as within São Tomé, right? You obviously want to have at very minimum, the São Tomean citizens by naturalization through investment having the same rights vis-a-vis the São Tomean government as all other São Tomeans. Jay, what do you think?
I would say it really depends on your personal connection to that country. Like, do you care about whether you can vote there, really? And then for which country it is, in some countries, diaspora votes will have a larger impact, and in others it'll have a relatively smaller impact. For example, I'm currently eligible, and I'm looking to try to get Hungarian citizenship because my grandfather was originally a Hungarian living in Serbia before he came to the U.S. In Hungary, a total of 378,000 Hungarians living outside of Hungary are registered to vote. And in the last Hungarian election, it was something like, here it is, about 94% of them voted for the government of Viktor Orban. And whether you agree or not with his policies and his attitudes, that's a huge boost to his electoral capabilities in any election, having the potential to get 400,000 voters. And it seems like about 200,000 of them voted in the last election, mainly for Mr. Orban's Fidesz party. That's the size of a decent-sized city in Hungary. There were only about 5 million votes total for the entire country, because it's not a big country. So I guess both how much you care about it and also, what the impact could be both on your citizenship rights moving forward, because there have been conversations about limiting citizenship rights for Hungarians abroad because of this voting impact, or limiting their right to vote because of this voting impact on Hungarian elections. So really, there are pros and cons even to having voting rights and in a particular country, because you also, when a large number of people have voting rights, that their skepticism as to whether those people are really connected to that country, that can create a difficult situation for their citizenship rights and cast doubt on whether that should be afforded to them at all.
Hungary is a great example. They're not a tiny country like São Tomé, but they're a relatively small country, about a 10 million population. And since that law, the law that or one of the paths, of course, to Hungarian citizenship is simplified naturalization for descendants of Hungarians. It was passed in 2011. Hungary has naturalized over 1 million people since 2011 pursuant to that law. That's 10%. And that figure, I've been using that figure for a year and a half. It's got to be well over 1 million now, because I think it was a year and a half ago that it was a million that had naturalized since then. So in voting terms, voting bloc terms, That's huge. That's absolutely enormous. And it sounds, I wasn't aware of that figure that you mentioned, Jay. I think 300 and some thousand registered or brought to vote. That's a serious voting block when you're talking about a country that has a population of only 10 million. Okay, so right now, guys, it's 12:09 Pacific Standard Time. We've been going for about an hour and 9 minutes. The default for these spaces was going to be an hour. Let's go for another 10 to 20 minutes. Let's push it maybe to an hour and a half if there's appetite, and then we can wrap up the space and then talk about what topics for the future spaces. One thing I wanted to talk about is basically involuntary loss of Sao Tomean citizenship, right? That speaks to the robustness of a citizenship. If you're picking up another citizenship, especially if you're paying a lot of money for it, people want that to be robust. Typically, they want to have the ability to keep that for the rest of their lives, pass it on to their children's, and not have it be treated like a residency permit or a visa, something that can be kind of taken away involuntarily easily, right? So what I did, I took the 2022 São Tomé and Principe citizenship and nationality law. It's written in Portuguese. I threw it into Google Translate. I'm reading the English translation, which is dangerous, right? Because things are lost in translation. If you read the Portuguese version, if anything that I say here is incorrect or distorted, please, by all means, let us know. But Article 16 has a section for loss of nationality. Okay, so Article 16 has a subsection, Part 2, permanently loses São Tomean nationality. Okay, Tomean by naturalization. A, anyone who threatens the security of the São Tomé state. That scares me, and I'll go back to that in a moment. Any type of vague reference to security of the state, that's typically been used as kind of a big catch-all that allows country governments to kind of do whatever they want, to quote unquote protect security. I'll get back to that in a moment. B, anyone who repeatedly threatens public health. Okay. C, anyone who obtains São Tomé nationality through forgery or any other fraudulent means or by misleading the competent authorities. So these are three listed terms for involuntary loss of São Tomean citizenship. That last one is a typical mechanism that we see in countries, naturalization codes. Typically, people who attain the naturalization by fraud or forgery or by material misrepresentations are subject to lose that. I don't find that problematic. That's kind of par for the course. But the first one bothers me because, and generally speaking, I haven't seen if there's case law, if there's examples in São Tomé about exactly what was considered threatening the security of the country or not. But generally, we see those terms, grounds, based off of protection of security of the state, vague grounds. We see them abused by governments. They're typically used, to basically, strong arm and get, whatever they want. What threatens the security of the São Tomé state, right? On one side of the spectrum, we can think of big, obvious examples, making, joining, a terrorist organization and trying to carry out an attack on São Tomé or carrying out an attack on São Tomé. But what about just expressing speech? What about expressing solidarity with Palestinians? What about expressing solidarity, with, I don't know if there's some group, let's say there's a group in São Tomé that thinks they should be self-autonomous, and you express solidarity. Does that threaten the security of the São Tomé state? I don't know. But it strikes me that could be definitely an attack vector on involuntary loss of citizenship. Alex, question for you. How do you have any opinion on what you think about conditions for loss of a CBI that reference vaguely and generally threatening the security of the state?
Yeah, I think the conditions for loss are one of the most important things one should consider with a CBI, because likely you're getting CBI as an insurance. So like any insurance policy, you want it to be there when you need it. And maybe you need it because you're a Canadian trucker or something, and the government's now mad at you for protesting. And you don't want it to, a trading partner of Canada now says, well, it threatens our national security to help you, even though you're a citizen of ours, and have Canada get mad at us. Therefore, we're going to revoke your citizenship. And I actually heard in the Brazilian context this was done, where they would sometimes revoke people's citizenship in order to be able to extradite them for naturalized citizens. And because they weren't allowed to extradite them as their own citizens, but if they ceased to be their citizens, then they could extradite them. So it just seems like one of these dangerous scenarios that much better to not have any way for the government to take back your citizenship. So the closer you can be to a natural born citizen in terms of your rights, the better.
What if you're a libertarian? What if you're libertarian minded? What if you're a Bitcoiner? What if you think the very structure and system of nation states is oppressive and threatens human freedom? What if you express those opinions? What if you support a monetary network that's independent of nation state government control? Could that be threatening the security of the São Tomé state? What do you think, Patrick, about that line? Is that really cause for concern? Do you think that line in there, or is that something that it's not really a big issue for most people if they just keep their head down and don't try to be an online revolutionary?
Being a revolutionary hardly ages well, unfortunately, for better or for worse. Yeah, I think it's large, and I think it's a pretty significant problem. And I'll give you a couple examples, and that is that anything that is considered a threat to the state is perceived, right? And perception is reality, unfortunately, especially when it comes to politics. And at the end of the day, you have laws and you have politics. Politics overlays the enforcement of laws, the underwriting of laws. And so, if you're in a country that doesn't have strong institutions, you can you can be subject to the whims of what we in the United States call like a banana republic. uh, you know, a new administration comes in, previous one gets persecuted. People, we don't like the policies that they did, therefore we end them, or we challenge and throw everyone into court that we that was part of the programs that we now don't like, right? And you can use your perception to be the grounds for that litigation. And you can see it in basically every constitution in the world. I mean, people forget that one of our Bill of Rights is to prevent the quartering of troops in a home. That is very 1700s, but it was such a problem at the time when the Constitution was written that it's literally written there in the Bill of Rights. You look at Mexico, anyone who is not a citizen can't buy property within a certain distance from the coast. They have to basically basically have the trust held by a bank, and then have the right to the land even though they don't technically have the title. And you think, oh, this is a goofy arrangement. Well, it's because Mexico had a huge coast on both the Pacific and Atlantic and did not have the means to patrol it all. And so the one way they could do it was to ensure that foreign residents didn't buy up all their coastline, right? And so are these perceived threats to the state? Yeah. And they're all historical legacies left in some of these laws and constitutions. If you look at a small country like Sao Tome and Principe, like what is considered a threat to the state? You could be traveling through the country and be caught with something that they find to be an illicit drug that is illegal elsewhere. That happens way more frequently than we hear about. You could be considered a threat to the state that way. Um, Especially island nations, they are typically very protective of their coastline because it's difficult to be 11 miles away from international waters and not have a substantive navy. So I think there's a lot of attack vectors for that. And then at the very end, I'll leave it also, and just a general critique of CBI programs, and that is that they are generally generationally limited. They're for the here and now. If you want your family in it, it's usually, an added ticket value. But its durability generationally is usually very limited. And that's a reflection of the fact that they don't know what the value of the citizenship is in the future. And so they don't want to underprice it now if they're giving citizenship into perpetuity, like a Iure Sanguini program. So there's all kinds of attack vectors, and those attack vectors for losing citizenship over time just naturally increase.
Yeah, well said, Patrick. And I think if you are either a potential consumer of these programs, or if you are a mobility professional, an advisor, consultant, lawyer, the way I'm looking at it is, I want to know who has been denaturalized or threatened to be denaturalized pursuant to that clause. Okay, threatens the security. Okay, I want clarity on that. Okay, for the client that thinks they're buying a generational asset, thinks they're buying an asset, a citizenship that they're going to use for the rest of their life, and hoping their children are going to use it as well. Okay, now, not every consumer needs it to be or wants it. Well, maybe everybody wants it to be a generational asset, but not everybody needs it to be a generational asset. There's some people who need a bridging citizenship. They have plans on naturalizing in additional countries elsewhere down the line. They need something maybe desperately for the here and now. Okay, and so they're willing to take the risk, of acquiring a citizenship that's not that robust and could potentially, be lost in the future, right? The São Tomé is interesting to me because it's currently the cheapest CBI, let's say accepting the Pakistan program, which we're not really that sure if it exists in practice or not. So I do wonder if we're going to see applicants or people that are interested that are not that bothered by perceived issues with the long-term robustness of the São Tomé citizenship. Maybe they want it now so that they can have the additional passport, possibly renounce or relinquish another citizenship, and they don't mind having it last 15 or 20 years into the future. But let me go to Patience. Patience, same question that I asked Patrick and Alex. If you read a line like that, okay, threatens the security of the São Tomé state, how big of an issue is it to you, or is it an issue at all?
This is Africa. Everything threatens the state. I'm saying that. I'm saying that as an African, so I guess it's fine. But to be honest, that's kind of true. There's a little bit of musical chairs happening in Mali, Niger, all of these places. Not that those are the closest diplomatic ties with São Tomé, especially Portuguese-speaking country. But I mean that's a catch-all phrase. I don't really like one thing I get from this is it's great. There's a new entrant. Of course, they're gonna want to protect themselves. So of course we're gonna have those clauses. I would be surprised if they did not exist, to be honest. And they possibly exist because they know they're gonna attract the shady folks. I don't really want to have that thing, but to me that program is a little bit. So what does it solve really? Because it's a really hard place to go to. It's like five direct flights from there. It doesn't really give you the actual mobility required to go there. So you have a passport that gives you some mobility. So it's a plan B without really being a plan B as is. It needs to be coupled with something else. I don't know what, but so who do you attract? And because of that, who you might have a need for that clause. Actually, it might actually be a viable need. It wouldn't be the first CBI program that had to denaturalize people. I mean, Cyprus did it. Many islands in the CBI did it. Nauru did it. Vanuatu did it. So I think on one hand you could say, hey, but I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to fear. Well, that's an issue because if they ask us to divulge to like tell them about everything, you can also you can also be sure that you won't have any privacy. So it's, I don't know. To me, it's great there's a new entrant, but like, and this is I don't know how practical it is of a program.
Okay. I'll just touch on something you said, Patience. The possibility of needing that type of clause because the program's going to attract shitty people. I don't mean all shitty people. I don't mean a majority. I presume that you mean, and I would agree, some small percentage of nefarious actors. But here's the thing. If you want to stop criminals from having the citizenship, you can have it in the nationality code a cross-reference to your criminal code and say anybody who's convicted of crimes under the sections A, B, C, D, E is subject to naturalization. Now, that has the problem of still providing a grounds for revocation of citizenship for conduct after the person naturalized, and I have a problem with that. I believe, I'm a naturalization maximalist. I believe when you naturalize in a country, generally speaking, the standard should be that if you commit a crime after that, you're not subject to naturalization. Try the person, convict them, put them in prison, let them, punish them. But taking away the citizenship shouldn't be a punishment. But anyway, the thing is, if they made a cross reference, São Tomé or any other country, to a specific section of their code and said anybody who's convicted of XYZ, is subject to denaturalization. Although I don't agree with the fact of making conduct after naturalization, subject to, basically subjecting the person to denaturalization, at least that would have the benefit of incorporating due process because the person would have the chance to fight the grounds under which presumably they're going to be denaturalized. At least that would have the benefit of particularity, not a vague term like threatening the security of XYZ. At least if they have a term like that, I and other lawyers and other advisors could go through and say, so here's what happens if you are convicted of XYZ, then you're subject to denaturalization. And the person could say, okay, got it. Oh, thank you. I understand. Now I understand. I can make an informed decision about whether I feel comfortable with the way this country is. Just vague allusion to, threatening the security, that's a problem in my opinion. That's a big problem for the two reasons. One, it's making a conduct that's done after denaturalization after naturalization subject to a person, or subjecting a person to being denaturalized. And then secondly, it's vague conduct. It's vaguely described. As our guy John Richardson often says. I'm going to butcher this. Certain penalty for uncertain conduct. That's a problem, especially if you're paying that amount of money. So that's how I feel about it. Okay, we're at 12:27 Pacific Standard. We've been going for an hour and 27 minutes. Just two last parts of the space. One, I was just, if anybody wants to give their final thoughts about what they generally think of the program, happy to do so. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot and say, hey, come up and do it. But if anybody has any opinion on, any summary on what they think about the program so far, the value, by all means, come up and say it. And then the last thing is I just wanted to solicit topics for the next mobility space to see what everybody wants to speak about. So first, does anybody have any, does anybody want to rate the program? Anybody want to give it an A, a B, a C, a D, an E?
Well, it exists. So it has this good thing about it. Let's not throw an F in there. It has the merit of existing.
I agree.
Which is good.
I agree. Anybody else?
I'm gonna just be arbitrary. I'm gonna give it a C-. I think with if you remove the citizenship restriction, then I think it goes up to a C+.
Okay, so we have a definitely a not F, and then we have a C- with the potential for moving to a C+. Anybody else?
I would say probably about a C as well. I think the main concern, again, is the citizenship number limit, which is quite odd. I personally, I wouldn't be that concerned about the potential for losing it on national security grounds, unless you want to become a citizen by investment and then become a dissident of whatever the government is. Like that seems odd as to what the thought process would be for somebody to become a citizen of a country to immediately like start rebelling against their government. But I mean, I guess stranger things have happened. I when I was looking at that article, one of the things that stood out to me was that one of their other conditions for losing it was like repeatedly attack the public health, and I was like, oh, this is about COVID, because the law was passed in 2022. So I think the exceptions there, or the potential for loss of nationality, were informed in large part by the context.
Denaturalization proceedings of 1J, charges walking around without a mask repeatedly. No,
Exactly.
I think it's a great point. I think that very well. I think COVID very well may have not just COVID, but also the COVID plus a threat of potentially future, pandemics or things like that may have been on the minds of the drafters for that edit. I will have to push back, Jay, on one thing you said. Become a citizen and then immediately become a dissident. Doesn't take being a dissident sometimes for countries to claim that you're a threat to the public safety. Hungary just this year or last year proposed the bill might have passed into legislation, basically being able to suspend the Hungarian citizenship of people who are also citizens in countries that Hungary perceives to be, a threat to the public safety. That's it. Just being a dual citizen with the wrong country. So what if you pick up São Tomé citizenship, and then let's say you're a real passport geek, you're an adventure traveler, you're a person who, you believe in multipolarity, non-allied citizenships, and let's say you find a path to Russian citizenship after that. You find a path to Syrian citizenship, Iranian citizenship. I'm not saying I know this is the case, but we've seen throughout the world that could be enough for countries to make the claim that you're now threatening our security. It's a vague term that's often abused, which is the problem, probably the biggest problem I have with those types of terms. But yeah, thank you, Jay, for your input there. Okay, 1231. 26th mobility space. We're going to do it Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm totally open. I don't have a suggestion. Does anybody have a topic or topics that they would like to throw into the hat? If not, I will put up a poll later today with 4 topics, and I'll let the interwebs decide what our next space topic is.
When to choose a passport for entering or exiting a country? Which passport to use? Strategies.
All right. So which passport/travel document to use when entering or exiting country? That's one. Anybody else?
Man, I was going to suggest the exact same thing Alex did. I'll also add 2 more to the mix now or in the future. One is maybe more exploring this bond program for visas to the United States. Curious if there's any success there, if there might be something like that for other countries in the future, if that creates a unique security risk, if you're posting bonds, or counterparty risk for bond agencies posting to what is presumed to be the consulate that's issuing you the visa. I think there's an interesting niche there. Not sure if it's worth an hour and a half conversation, but could be. And then again, not sure if this is worth an hour and a half conversation, but maybe the duration of passports, because I know that a lot of countries issue 5-year passports, which is kind of, most Americans don't know that, and that creates a whole host of interesting dynamics as it relates to access to springboard benefits, etc. So there's 3 ideas if you combine it with Alex's.
So
here's
first,
another idea.
Sorry, just one quick moment,
Sorry,
Jay.
go ahead.
So first of all, Patrick, the U.S. visa bond program, in conjunction with the concept of nationality toggling, okay, which you can use to avoid those types of restrictions, absolutely could take up a whole space. So that's definitely fair game for a topic. And I think the passport validity period as well could be. I think that could definitely be a whole hour and a half. So those are definitely in play. Jay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe a space about exploring springboard benefits in residency, because a lot of folks who are in this industry, they'll talk about benefits for being a citizen of one of the Eastern Caribbean states or CARICOM or what have you, various international unions and springboard residency rights. It would be interesting to talk about, what does that mean to the average person or the average consumer of one of these programs, and what the implications are, how vulnerable these benefits are. Just a thought.
Great. It's a great topic, and we've touched on that various times, different aspects of that, of springboard benefits. I'm understanding your suggestion to be specifically springboard benefits of residencies. We haven't had a space that specifically focuses on that. And yeah, there's definitely enough content there to talk about for an hour, if not more. Anybody else?
I think it might be interesting to do a program on Benin's new citizenship by recognition for descendants of the slave trade.
Okay, Benin. Okay, Benin's new citizenship program. Okay. Anybody else have a suggestion? Okay, great. So I think these are all great suggestions. I'm going to put those into the poll. So I'll still put up a poll, but I'm going to make up the poll of the suggestions that you guys all made. I'll put that poll up in the next 20 minutes or so. By all means, please vote. Everybody, please make your comments. Next mobility space is going to be Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. As always, that's going to be mobility space number 26 of 50 that we're doing this year. Anybody listening to this as a recording after it's recorded live, remember, everybody is welcome and anybody can speak. So thank you, everybody. Alex Ugorji, Patience is Alpha, David Bindell, Jay, Patrick McVaughn, and all the anonymous listeners. Thanks. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.